Hi there, this is a very quick introduction to debugging the first few steps of this Angular app that we've got. I'm using Chrome just because that or Firefox is an easier thing for me to use. Safari's got a reasonable debugger in it, but I can't sort of get to grips with it somehow. In Chrome, all you do is you right mouse click and choose Inspect Element, and it opens this window. And then you can use sources. It's really useful. You can click on the network tab and see what's been loaded. If nothing appears there, you just need to refresh the page and you'll see all the things that are loaded. Because occasionally you can get errors simply because you've not linked to the file correctly, and you can just you'll see a kind of 401 not found here. And if you've got the actual JavaScript errors in there, they'll appear in the console. But for debugging purposes, you can click on Source, navigate to your files, and just double-click on the files that you want to load, and then click in the margin to set breakpoints. So, following the instructions in the course that you're following, I've put breakpoints on certain lines here. And now I'm just going to refresh the page, and we'll see the first of those breakpoints hit. So, what it'll go to first of all is our services file. And by the way, I've put the breakpoints on what are executable lines. There are certain lines you can't put a breakpoint on, so you couldn't put a breakpoint on these lines because they're just a kind of declaration. It's only an executable line that you can put a breakpoint on. Occasionally you can click on something and the breakpoint will appear, but it won't ever stop there. Or sometimes what will happen is you'll put a breakpoint there and it will just disappear immediately, and then you'll find the breakpoint is right at the bottom or something, which is the only line that it can get to that's the nearest line to the executable. So I'm going to close up that window that says breakpoints. Often when I first load mine, call stack's opened, and I'll just close that because the real thing I'm interested in is local variables here. And you can, if there's a particular local variable you're interested in, add a watch expression by clicking on this plus and typing in, the name for a variable or whatever that you want to look at. So I'm defining this, the course that will get loaded, or the file that will get retrieved. The next thing, it will go and look at the definition for get courses, though it won't go in there yet. It will just look at that definition, and then that's the end of that really, and it will just go on to the next executable part, which I'll just skip past because it's gone into Angular, and whilst it's really interesting to watch it go around Angular, occasionally it can be a bit confusing. So I'm just going to resume, and it'll come back into my controller. So in my course controller, which is the one that's running at the moment because the URL, which you can't quite see, is courses, then it's come into this, I think of it as like a constructor function for the controller. And it's coming in and it's defining a variable called getCourses, which is a function. So it won't do that function, of course. It will just notice that it's there and register it as such. And then it comes to the line which actually does invoke getCourses. So the next time when I click this button to step into, in fact I will, it will go into that function called getCourses. And we can see that now what it's going to do is call the method called getCourses, which is a method of the data service that I've just defined. So if I step into that, we'll see it go into that data service, getCourses. So here we are inside that. So the first thing that's happening, I'll try not to move my mouse about because otherwise it gives very handy tips, but tips that we don't want to see at the moment. So the first thing I'm doing is creating a defer variable. We can call it whatever the hell we want, but insofar as it's returning the promise that is encapsulated in Q. By the way, these were the dependencies that I brought in here. Q. Okay, so that is an object that contains all of those things, including defer, you notice, which is what I'm looking in. It has various properties in that object. And then the HTTP object, which is the actual thing that controls the get and post methods and various things like that, all of the AJAX functionality. So we're making up a promise. So that's the first thing. And then we're going to make a call to get, but in actual fact, it's an asynchronous call. So what will happen is, although it will call it, we won't go into any of these yet because it will go off and call it and it will be busy doing stuff. So I'm just going to press run because you'll see that it won't go into any of these breakpoints. It will go to breakpoint on line 42 next because get's off and busy collecting something. So it goes to line 42 and it returns the promise to our get services, the data service get courses. So that's what that returns, and when it returns it, then will be executed when the promise eventually comes back with either a response or a rejection or whatever. So I'll let it run on again, and the next thing, it's taken us back into services, because now get has finished and it's come back with success, and it's come back with success with this response object here. And that, in fact, I think I've got the response object showing here. So there, look, in that response object is a property called course count, which equals 4, and a set of results. And if we look at each of those results, then they're the course code. Now, where does that come from? Well, in actual fact, if I just go off screen and open another tab, we'll see that what that is the course, the JSON file, courses.json, where that's the course count, and then these are the results, an array which contain, it's an array of objects which contain that, and that matches to the information that we've just got back in response. Look, the course count and an array of results. Course count and an array of results. Course count and results, which is an array. Okay. So we've got that response object back, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to call defer resolve to say, okay, the promise is fulfilled, it's been successful, and I'm passing into resolve as an argument an object, because that's the object that will be sent back because we've fulfilled this promise. So I'm sending an object back, but I'm making up properties for it to just make it a bit easier to get, instead of having to pass back response.results and response.courseCount, I'm just passing an object back with a property called data. I've just made that up. We could make any property we want. And I've assigned to data response results, which is that array of objects. And then into a property that I've called row count, because it's how many rows of courses there are, I'm putting into there the response object, its property called course count, which equals 4. So all of that gets returned. So I'll run on. And where does it get returned to? Well, it gets returned and is executed by then. And then is called, in actual fact, there's an open bracket there, and then it's got 3 parameters. That's the first parameter, a function called if the success, comma, that's the second parameter, or argument, I suppose, more accurately. That's the second argument, which is a function that will be called if there were an error. And this is a third function, third parameter, third argument, that will be called in case of notification. Now, we're not programming anything to do with notification, but you could use that to keep a kind of progress meter or something like that if it was a call that was taking a long time. But so we're dealing with this response object, and the response object is the thing that defer has sent back to me using its promise. What was it? Resolve. And it's got data, which is the array, and row count, because that was the object I sent back. So I'm getting response row count, which is 4, and adding to it a string space courses, so that'll be stored in scope course count. So scope course count now equals 4 courses. And scope is an object built into Angular. All objects built into Angular are prefixed with $sign or variables that you can access, and scope acts a kind of like a link between the controller and the view, the HTML. And in the HTML we could refer to curly brace, course count, close curly brace, close curly brace, inside any kind of HTML element that is bound to this particular controller, the course controller. And similarly, I'm getting all the array of course objects, and I'm putting those into courses so that I can iterate through those again in my view. And that's it. Simple and straightforward. If my, well, not exactly simple and probably not exactly straightforward, but as close as it gets. Your listing might not look like that, but that's just because I've spent a bit of time doing some HTML to make the table come out striped and one thing and another. Okay, I hope that helps. Please do the same, following the instructions on the course itself, so that you can follow that through, and it will take a bit more time looking at what the debugger can tell you. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.